Hey there, art nerds! Happy Valentine's Day! I have a Cupid-inspired alcohol marker tutorial for you guys today, and my awesome art nerds on Patreon have access to a printable version of the line art. Two printable versions, in fact, a colored and then a black and white version as well. So today I'm going to walk you through the coloring process for our Cutie Cupid. So to start off, I have a penciled sketch, and this is penciled on a Strathmore 300 series Bristol. Originally, my sketch was done digitally in Photoshop. I printed it out using my blue line printing technique, and I penciled it so that you guys could see what I'm inking. I'm going for a colored line art today, and that means I've pulled out my Tombow Fudenosuke brush pens. I have the neon set and the classic color set. And every time I pull out these brush pens, I feel like I need to implore Tombow to please consider expanding your lineup and adding shadow and maybe pastel colors, because while I love these marker and waterproof brush pens and I use them all the time, you guys see them frequently here on the channel, I do wish the color gamut was a little bit wider. So for a colored line art like this, I'm starting with the closest approximation that I have to what I imagine the local color for these objects will be. So for example, for her hair, I wanted her to have blonde hair, so I'm starting with the yellow that's in the set, and then I'm inking the shadowy parts of her hair using a brown so that we get this kind of dichromatic effect. And I'm going to do this for all of the objects in this illustration. So the laurel leaves in her hair, we're going to use green to start, and then we're going to ink the shadows using blue. And the nice thing about doing a colored line art is it doesn't add as much black, it doesn't add as much contrast as inking with just black ink would. So you have a much brighter, more vibrant, and more lively line art, at least in my opinion. Now, some people don't really care for colored line arts, and that's why I always provide two versions of the line art to my art nerds, the colored version and then a black and white version for people who want to keep it pretty simple. If you are coloring along at home and you printed out the printable, I would recommend that you print using a toner-based printer, like a copier, for example, on a heavier paper. I'm inking today on Strathmore 300 series Bristol, so the less expensive Bristol. It still has a smooth finish, and it is a thirsty paper. I sometimes call this a marker killer because it'll really drain your markers dry. But the plus side to this paper is because it's so thirsty, you can do a lot of layering and you can do a lot of blending. And I find that paper is typically designed for marker paper, like Copic's marker paper has a finish on it, and I can do about 3 layers of marker, and that's all it's willing to accept. And I like doing really smooth blends and lots of layers. So I would rather work with a thirstier paper and buy marker refills than work on a less thirsty paper and be limited in terms of how many layers I can do. If you don't have access to a toner printer though, you can do my blue line printing technique and ink it yourself at home. That could be great inking practice. I know when I was at SCAD, we would take turns switching sketches with one another and then inking them, just as a way to kind of develop a new skill set and ink things that might be just a little bit outside of our comfort zones. So if you're looking to increase your inking skill set, or you think this would be a fun piece to put your own spin on, I invite you to do that as well. And I have a tutorial on how to do the blue line inking tech, or the blue line printing technique here, and I'll link that in the description below. In fact, make sure you check the description because I'm going to have all the materials that I use with handy dandy links. Those help support the channel, and it also makes it a little bit easier for you to do your shopping, so that hopefully you can do most of your shopping in one place if you're looking to acquire some new art supplies, as well as music credits and other tutorials that I recommend. So if you're looking for more alcohol marker tutorials, or you just like hanging out with me, I'll have some great links for you guys down in the description below. This is a pretty simple line art with lots of room in the background for your own embellishments. Some fun additions might be stickers, or you might want to put something on the background to add a bit of a pattern or a resist. I have my own ideas for it, but if you decide to color along and you come up with something different for the background, I would love to see it. So if you share it online, make sure to tag me at Nattosoup, Nattosoup, so I can check it out and see your awesome artwork. I am inking on a 9x12 piece of Bristol paper, so on the smaller side, but not super small, still big enough that I can do some really nice blends. And I decided to leave everything just kind of open and easy and not as worked as some of my other alcohol marker pieces. So this is more of just a coloring for relaxation, coloring for fun sort of illustration. The white sheet of paper that you guys see me using to kind of cover the illustration from time to time is a blotter sheet. This is going to help prevent me getting excessive oils from my hands on the paper. It's also going to help prevent the inks from smearing, since the paper will blot up any wet ink rather than smearing it. So while it doesn't make for as an appealing tutorial, since sometimes I'm covering the area I just worked on and it's harder to see all those details, it does make for a cleaner illustration, and it does make it a lot easier to ink. So this is a small technique that I highly recommend. It costs you basically nothing. I'm using a sheet of printer paper, but it has saved me so much heartache and so many headaches in the past. The initial sketch was penciled with HB lead, so it's going to be pretty easy to erase. And after I've finished inking everything and it's had a chance to dry for 24 hours, allowing the ink to cure to the paper, I'm going to erase it using a soft white vinyl eraser. I'm a big fan of the Pentel high polymer white vinyl erasers, and I also like the Tombow mono erasers. But we're using a soft white vinyl eraser because it's going to prevent ghosting, and that means, you know, when you're erasing and it picks up some of the ink, and it's also going to prevent smearing. So it's a very gentle eraser that you can find at most big box stores if you're looking to get some of your own. And then after I've erased the line art, I scan it, and it's time to start swatching and selecting our colors. So one of the things I do is I pick out a bunch of potential colors, and then I label them. I allow them to dry for 10 minutes so that the colors, if they're going to shift, have already shifted, and then I decide what colors I want to use for the illustration. I'll have a list of the colors that I used down in the description below. These are just suggestions. I encourage you to use whatever colors and whatever markers you enjoy using. I'm using a combination of Copic, Prismacolor, and Blick Studio markers. So for her skin, I'm using E00 and Blick 217, E11, and E13. For the blush, I am using R01, Prismacolor PB12, and R02. For her hair, I'm using Blick 066, 009, and 037. And I'm also using E08, I believe. Oh no, I'm sorry. Blick 216 for the darker areas of her hair. For the whites of her eyes and the whites of her wings and her clothing, I'm kind of using a variety of blues, including Blick 008, Copic B60, B32, PB202, and PB48. For her purple sort of drape, I'm using PB148, PB60, PB50, PB128, and BV17. For additional blues, like the blues in her eyes, I'm using B24, 038, and 041. For the pinks on her, I guess that would be the chiton underneath, I am using 150, 011, 123, and PB8. I'm also using RV29. For the reds on that like crossbody halter, I'm using R35, R39, and PB151. For the skin's shadow, I'm using V22. And for the laurels in her hair, I'm using YG01, G17, G28, apologies. For the bow, I'm using 066, 009, 037, as well as a little bit of 216, so similar color palette to her hair, and a little bit of E15. And then for the string on the bow and arrow, I'm using C3, C8, and I think C10. And that's the majority of the colors. I'll have those listed out down in the description below. So to create a nice clean frame on this illustration, I'm using MT washi tape just to kind of block off the frame. This is really great with alcohol markers. I've tried other washi tapes in the past with alcohol markers, and I often have problems with it lifting or bleeding underneath, but the MT tape seems to do a really good job attaching itself to the paper without tearing the paper when I try to remove it. Now, an area I kind of struggle with is getting those clean, straight lines. Sometimes I do end up a little bit catawampus, and I have to remove the tape and replace it a couple times just to get the border that I'm looking for. So for her eyes, I'm starting with, this ended up being a darker blue than I meant to start with, but that's fine. I started with B60, and then I added a little PB202 for the shadow. And then I'm going in with her wings, and I am starting with, that also looks like B60. And I'm going to use PB202 to add shadow there as well. And I'm trying to leave some of the white of the paper, and I'm going to blend that back out using a colorless blender. And honestly, one of the reasons I like using this combination of markers is that all three of these brands have really nice flexible nibs. All three of them blend well together. They don't excessively bleed. They don't excessively color shift. I don't get any like weird color reactions when I use them together. And they all react well to any of the blenders, like the Blick blender or the Prismacolor blender or the Copic blender. They'll all work well with it. So it allows me to kind of fill in gaps in my color selection that I might have if I was just using one brand. But if you're new to alcohol markers and you want to get some that feature replaceable nibs and are refillable and are all around great, I highly recommend the Blick Studio brush markers. I use them pretty frequently, so I think that goes to show you guys that I do really like them, and they're very affordable for what they are. So for her eyes, I started with B32. For the next darker color, I went in with 041, and then I added in a little bit of 038. And then I also added some purple, so I used B50 to start adding in some purple into the hearts just to kind of create this cute iris color. So for her base skin color, I am starting with E00. And I did a little bit of undercoloring first using R01 just to kind of pre-tone it because I wanted her to have kind of a delicate blush going on. So I applied R01 to all the usual places where I normally apply blush: the cheeks, the tops of the eyelids, underneath the eyebrows, the nose, the lips, underneath the chin, the elbows, and basically anywhere where there's skin on top of skin. So for my second color, I'm using Blick 217, and I'm doing it section by section, and as I go, I'm blending it back out with E00, and this is going to give us that softer transition. So alcohol markers are a lot like watercolor in that you can do wet into wet and get softer blends, or you can do wet over dry and get a more striking color transition. And for this, I really wanted those softer blends, so I'm kind of working back and forth between the same colors. The next color that I'm using is a really light Prismacolor pink, PB12. And then I'm going back over it with our Blick 217, and that's going to help blend it out and add in additional skin shadow and just kind of create a more soft, rounded form. So that's another thing to consider when you're using alcohol markers. Are we coloring soft, rounded forms? Are we coloring forms that are really close to the light source? Are we coloring forms that have like a harsh transition between the individual planes? So the difference between a sphere and a cube, for example. And I have some tutorials where I talk about that quite a bit, so I'll be sure to link those for you guys down in the description. I then went in again with another layer of skin tone blush using R02, blending that back out. And now I'm going in with E11, which is a sort of warm skin tone-ish color. At this point, I go ahead and I add in the skin shadow using V22. So this is kind of a contrast color to the skin tones that we've selected for this. Going back in again with E13 to add another layer of shadow to the skin. And I'm kind of just working back and forth, blending it out, kind of making sure that there isn't like a super harsh transition. Another thing though is that alcohol markers will sometimes dry lighter than they go down. That's one of the reasons we wait 10 minutes when we're swatching to make sure that the colors will still work. So for her lips, I decided to go into some of the pinks that I'd selected. So I'm using 123 and 011 to add a little bit more pink to her lips. So for her hair, I really have trouble finding good yellows and blondes when rendering hair. You guys probably noticed that if you watch my coloring hair with Copics. Copic has a lot of gaps in their yellows in terms of like yellows that are good for natural rendering. They have a lot of very saturated, bright, lemony yellows, but not a lot of good hair and skin cut, not hair, but skin color. Dang it, hair tone colors. So I'm starting with Blick 066 for the first layer. I blended it out a little bit just to kind of soften some of those white highlights using the colorless blender. Then I'm going back over it again with Blick 009, which is kind of a darker goldish tone. I'm going to blend that back out with Blick 066. So this is an area where Blick really excels. They've got some yellows that work really well for rendering hair or say golden tones. They're not quite as saturated and yellowy as some of the Copic yellows. And I'm working my way kind of slowly because she's got all these curls and I want to make sure that I leave a lot of highlights and that I don't turn all the curls to mush. I'm also coloring her eyelashes and her eyebrows with 009 to begin with. Now, the nice thing about alcohol markers is that you can get a few layers of color out of them so you can really build those colors up. You don't need as large a color selection as you might think, especially if you're willing to layer your colors and use them pretty strategically along with your colorless blender. So for the third layer in her hair, I'm using Blick 037, and this is mainly to start pulling in some of that definition and getting some of the more striking highlights. You guys can see by adding that darker color, we're making our lighter colors pop a lot more. And this is also to add in some shadow. So my main goal with this is to create some definition and to create some layers so that you guys can actually see what's going on with her hair. I softened that layer out a bit with our previous color, Blick 009. And then I can go back in and start coloring in her eyelashes and her eyebrows. So you guys will see that I kind of go back and forth adding. So that would be 037 that I'm adding in right now. Nope, I lied to you guys. I'm sorry. Blick 216. So this is a brown. And I'm going to blend it back out with our 037 so that it softens the transition a little bit. It doesn't read as like this harsh brown on all this blonde hair, but I still wanted to add in some brown for those kind of low lights. So for the laurels in her hair, I'm starting with YG01, then I'm going in with G17, and then I'm going in with G28. And I did end up grabbing a blue green as well. I believe this is ocean green. I don't have it listed on the thing, but I'm going in with a blue green to add some shadows to the laurels. And I'm not really rendering anything in particular, like super detailed this time. It's just kind of a smooth render without a lot of surface detail or textural details. So it's just something kind of relaxing and soothing to color for fun. So for her shirt, I'm starting with B60, which is a really nice warm blue. I'm going in with our, it looks like PB48 to add in some shadows and to get some definition, blending it back out with our B60. And then I'm going to work on the golden coin belt that she has. So using the same colors that I used for her hair for the most part. So 066, 009, 037, and then our darker tones will be 216, and then eventually a little bit of E49. But that's way further down the line. So for the draped thing over her dress, apologies, I started with 150. Then I'm going to go in with 123. And I'm kind of building up my color, but I'm also leaving some highlights here so that we get the light catching on it. Another layer of our 123, building up that color and really trying to get as much use out of a single marker as possible. And then I'm going in with 011. So that's another area that Blick really does well with, is these kind of like corally, salmony kind of pinks. Copic has a lot of those in like the lighter scale, but Blick has some good middle ground ones. And then I also added PB8 for our darker shadows in the folded drapery. So for the heart, bow, and arrow, I am starting with, I don't have it marked, but I do think I'm starting with PB280 and then going in with RV06 and kind of blending them back and forth. And I really want the heart at the arrow tip to look like, even though it's pink and a heart, I want it to look a little bit sharp and a little bit like an actual arrowhead. Now for her bow and arrow, I wanted to do kind of a simple, consistent color scheme, not too many colors with this one. So we basically have like white, gold, pink, and then purple accents with some red. So a really basic color scheme here. And I tried to repeat a lot of the same colors so that it feels kind of more coherent, but I encourage you guys to do whatever you enjoy doing, whatever color scheme you want to use for this, go for it if you're coloring along at home. So for the bow and arrow, pretty similar to her hair and the gold coins around her waist, 066, 009, 037, then maybe a little bit of E97, and then maybe a bit of either E08 or 216, just to get in some of those darker tones. And for the string, I kept it really simple, as well as for the shaft of the bow and arrow. So I'm using C3, which is a cool gray, I think C8, and maybe a little bit of black, and just blending them back and forth. So at this point, I have most things filled in, so I can go back and kind of assess my contrast and adjust the coloring. So for example, on the draped pink thing she's wearing, I went in and added some Gumball. And this is a custom filled Copic sketch marker that's been filled with a Ranger ink. That's something I was really into for a while because you can get some really fun colors. Unfortunately, it's a little bit difficult to get those empty Copic sketches. So that's the only reason that I'm not as into it as I used to be. So for the drape, I'm using PB148 as the base color. Then for the secondary color, I used PB60. Then I have PB128. And this is another area where Prismacolor really shines, is these like good true purples, because Copic has violets, red violets, and blue violets, but not a lot of purples. For my next darker color, I have PB50. And then for my darkest color, which I haven't quite gotten to yet because I'm still blending back and forth creating the folds, I'm going to use BV17, which isn't really as dark as I would have liked. I would have liked a really nice dark purple, but I don't quite have the color I'm looking for, so I'm going to make do with what I've got. So for the red cross strap thing, I'm starting with, looks like 150, that would be like ballet pink. And then I'm going in with R35, and then I'm gonna go in with R39 and then PB151. And I want it to look kind of like leather, so I'm leaving a lot of the light reflection, sorry. So a lot of the white of the paper, I'm leaving that still visible, and then being kind of careful with how I blend it out so I don't lose all of that kind of difference in color. And then finally, I'm starting in on the background. So I'm starting with RV25, which is not nearly as hot pink, A, after it dries, and B, in real life. For some reason, the camera kind of struggles with this color. I am going to do a full layer of this, and then I'm going to go over it just around the girl, as you guys will see in a moment, with RV29. And then I'm gonna go back over with the same color, both to blend it out and to hide some of the scratchiness of this background, because it's always a little bit difficult to cover these kind of larger areas. And these kind of larger areas really are the marker killers. These are what's going to drain your markers. So if you wanted to switch and go mixed media and maybe use watercolor to fill in the background here, that could be a good way to go, or a colored ink could be a good way to go, or spray inks or an airbrush system. Any of those could work well for this, because this does take up a lot of ink and it can kill your markers. So I just wanted to put that out there and make you guys aware of it. Like, I'm choosing to do this because it's my marker, but I don't want you guys to do something because I did it and then you regret it. So I try to disclose to you guys, you know, when I'm making good choices and when I'm making kind of iffy choices. This large area of background here could also be a great opportunity to add your own spin to this illustration. Originally, I'd kind of planned on doing a series of like sunset or sunrise colored clouds, but life has been throwing a lot of curveballs at me and a lot of family drama at me lately, so I just didn't quite have the time or the brain space to do that. But I think that would be a great use of the background. You could also do a cute pastel gradient, would also be really nice without totally wrecking your markers. Or you could do pastel gradient and then paint clouds on top of it. So there's a few options with the background being as open as it is. You could also use heart stickers to cover the background, and that would be really cute. Or you could use some sort of resist or masking technique. It's really up to you. Usually what I would do is I would create a mask and then I would use spray inks to kind of create a background, and that would kind of save my markers some. But again, honestly, I just did not feel like doing like masking Frisket on this one. I used to be really into masking Frisket, but I have this problem where it tends to want to permanently affix itself to the paper and leave gummy residue behind. And I know you can use Japanese tone as like a mask like that. I just don't happen to have any. And I guess I was feeling kind of lazy, to be really honest. I didn't feel like pulling all that out, but that would have been a really cute use of the background. So I'm doing a border around her using RV29. And that's just to add in a little bit of cheap visual interest without having to do a whole lot of thinking. It's also to help pull some of the focus and the attention to her. And it's also to kind of help ease some of the patchiness, because I am going to do another layer of RB25. But even at this point, I knew the marker was running dry and that I need to put a refill. I don't have a refill for it yet, but I need to refill it. So I'm doing some kind of cheapy techniques to kind of hide how cheap I'm going to be a little bit later on, to kind of get the most out of that marker. And here is where I do the second layer of our RV25, going in the opposite direction so that we can kind of cover up some of the streakiness. So I know there is a new marker on the market. I think Chihiro How talks about it. It's the OLO or OLO markers. And supposedly those are like good to the last drop markers where you can really get all the ink in the body, even though the barrel is much smaller. I would be very interested in trying those, and I'm probably going to pre-order those, because as much as I love my Blicks, my Prismacolors, and my Copics, the drying issues are really kind of frustrating. And the fact that the ink flow often can't keep up with what I'm trying to do, it's not a good look for me, and it's not always a good look for the marker. So I love reviewing alcohol markers for you guys. If you guys are interested in seeing me review those, a great way to encourage me to do that would be to help fund the purchase of them. And you can do that by joining me over on Patreon, where you'll also get super cute line arts like this one, as well as access to my class materials, because I'm always teaching new classes, and I'm always sharing, or trying to always share, the materials or the updated materials with my patrons on Patreon. So that's a great way to take an art class for as little as $2 a month. So once I've got the background all filled in, now's a good time to kind of reassess the inks and reassess the contrast. And I decided I want to go back in and re-ink it just a little bit with a little bit more black ink, so that I can get some more of those low light contrasts back in, since this piece is a very light piece and there's not a lot of shadows and there's not a lot of contrast going on, which for a cute Cupid piece works well, but I did want to tweak the contrast just a little bit before I pulled out my white gouache. it's time to add a little bit of sparkle, a little bit of pizzazz, a little bit of white gouache. And I'm using a cheap synthetic brush for this, and it worked well for adding the white gouache highlights to her eyes and to her lips and to her hair and to the feathers and to all the little areas where I wanted to add just a little tweak of white rim lighting or a little tweak of highlight. But in a minute, you guys will see me doing white gouache hearts in the background, and this brush could just not keep up with the design that I had in mind. So it fell apart a little bit. We're gonna call that the hand of the artist though. That way you know someone hand painted this, but I definitely should have chosen a softer brush to do the hearts in the background. It would have turned out a lot better. So with my gouache, I used to squeeze out a little pate of gouache onto a hard surface and then add water, but I noticed that I was getting a lot of waste because I basically just use white gouache for highlights and maybe sometimes for background details, but I don't really paint with gouache a whole lot. So what I do now is I actually stick the brush inside of the tube and I squeeze the tube up just a little bit just so I can get just a little bit of gouache. Now you never want to work with gouache like just totally dry straight from the tube. You do want it to have kind of the consistency of cream. So sometimes I'll take my brush and then swish that on a palette just to kind of mix the water and the gouache on the brush. It's a little bit like if you ate a handful of dry cereal and then you took a slug of milk, which is not something I'm recommending, but it works for me and it causes less waste. But if you are going to, you know, you could like have a little ceramic dish with your gouache pate in it and just work from that and let it dry and reactivate it. And that would probably work great. That would probably work better than what I'm suggesting. But I have a cat and I don't want it to collect cat hair, which is what would happen. That's what happens with anything that I leave out. So I figured this method works best for me for the time being. You guys can kind of see how the hearts fell apart. It's because the brush was a little bit too stiff. It didn't want to flex for all those curves. So it was a lot harder to do those hearts than I really expected. And once everything had a chance to dry, it's time to remove our washi tape. I had taped it to the back just so that it wasn't like sticking to the mat and I could move it around as necessary. So it does take a little bit more patience to remove the washi tape, but it removes really cleanly. I didn't have any seepages. It gives me a really nice clean line and it didn't tear the paper. So all in all, I am still really happy with the empty washi tape. So here is our finished marker illustration. Thank you guys so much for hanging out and coloring along with me. I hope you guys have a very happy Valentine's Day, no matter how you choose to celebrate it. In my family, we always took it as an opportunity to tell other family members how much they meant to us and how much we love them. So Valentine's Day doesn't have to just be a romantic holiday. It can also be a day where you take a moment to tell the friends and the people in your life how important they are to you and how much they mean to you. This is something we should be doing all the time because you never know when it's going to be the last time you see them, and it's important to express appreciation. But I also know it can be very easy to forget to do something like that, especially when life gets stressful. So I like to use holidays like Valentine's Day as an opportunity to just take a little extra time to show some appreciation for the people in my life and how much they mean to me and how much I love them. So to me, Valentine's Day can be a family appreciation day. So it could also be a wonderful friend appreciation day. But I just want you guys to know that I really appreciate being able to hang out with you guys and share my art with you guys. And I hope you guys enjoyed getting to hang out with me today too. This little Cupid illustration is my Valentine to you guys to say thank you guys so much for hanging out with me over the years and spending time with me over the years, making comics and drawing and coloring and painting. It's been a lot of fun and I hope that we have some good years to come. If you guys enjoyed this tutorial, if you found it helpful, useful, and informative, it would really mean a lot to me if you shared it with somebody who you know is interested in art or is interested in alcohol markers who might enjoy coloring along with it. So a huge thanks to my amazing patrons on Patreon. You guys have the line art for this as just a small little extra thanks. Thank you guys so much for all you do, and I hope to see you guys again soon with another tutorial. Bye guys!